The first time I met Cheryl Whitmore, she was standing in my driveway with a clipboard and a scowl like she'd just sniffed spoiled milk. I had just gotten home from work, still in my scrubs, and there she was, blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and that HOA badge hanging around her neck like she was some kind of mall cop for lawns. "Mr. Preston Pike," she barked, without so much as a hello. "You're delinquent on your HOA dues. 3 years' worth. That's over $2,800 with late fees." I blinked. No, I'm not. My land isn't even part of your HOA." She tapped her clipboard like it was holy scripture. "According to our updated maps, your property falls within the jurisdiction of the Sycamore Trails Homeowners Association. You're responsible for annual dues, maintenance fees, and all governing regulations." I laughed. "Your updated maps? My deed says otherwise. I specifically bought this lot 10 years ago because it was outside of HOA control." That's when she got that look, you know the one. Like she couldn't believe someone dared talk back to her. "Well," she sniffed, "we'll see what the board says. If you don't pay by next Friday, we'll file a lien." I wasn't about to let some clipboard crusader tell me I owed almost $3,000 to a corrupt HOA I didn't even belong to. I'd dealt with worse at the hospital. So I told her, dead calm, "Go ahead. But if you come on my property again without permission, I'll call the sheriff." She turned on her heel and stomped off, heels clicking like a metronome of entitlement. That night, I pulled out every document I had: survey maps, my purchase agreement, and the original plat from the county office. Sure enough, my property sat just outside the HOA boundary line. I even had a letter from the previous owner confirming the exemption, signed and notarized. But that didn't stop Cheryl. The next week, I got a certified letter from Sycamore Trails HOA. It was official, demanding payment or they'd proceed with a lien. Signed by none other than Cheryl Whitmore, HOA president. I dropped the letter on my kitchen table and muttered, "All right, Cheryl, you want to fight? You got one." I wasn't just any average Joe. Before I became a nurse, I spent 6 years in the Army handling property disputes and logistics. I knew how to read legal language and bureaucratic nonsense better than most attorneys. And I had time. I filed a formal dispute with the county clerk, attaching every document proving I was exempt. Then I sent Cheryl a response via certified mail, complete with copies of everything and a firm notice: cease and desist harassment or face legal action. 3 days later, she showed up again. This time with backup, a guy in a polo shirt with a fake gold name tag that read Vice President. "You can't just ignore the board," she snapped. "Refusal to comply will result in escalating penalties." I stepped outside, phone in hand. "You're trespassing. The sheriff is 2 minutes away if I hit this button. You want to keep playing games? Go ahead. But this whole thing? It's illegal. And I've already involved the county." The vice president looked uneasy. Cheryl just stared at me like she was trying to melt my face with her eyes. "You'll regret this," she hissed. I grinned. "I'm counting on it." The next morning, I took a detour before heading to the hospital. I stopped by the county recorder's office, where I met with Susan, a clerk who'd worked there for over 20 years and knew the land boundaries better than anyone short of a licensed surveyor. I handed her a copy of my property deed and the new map Cheryl had included in her threatening letter. Susan didn't even try to hide her reaction. "This isn't even close to accurate," she said, holding the two side by side. "They drew their own lines." "Can they legally do that?" I asked. She scoffed. "Absolutely not. Any boundary change or annexation needs to be approved by the county zoning board, then voted on by affected property owners. There's no record of any such approval here." I leaned in. "Would you be willing to write a certified statement confirming that?" She nodded. "I'll have it notarized by lunch." By the time I left the office, I had a solid legal foundation under me. I filed a complaint with the county zoning board, attaching the fraudulent map Cheryl had distributed. Then, I sent a copy of that complaint to the state attorney general's office. Fraudulent annexation of land to impose dues isn't just a civil issue, it borders on racketeering. They'd know what to do. Back at home that evening, I noticed something new: 3 fluorescent orange tags stuck to my mailbox, my garden gate, and my front door. All from Sycamore Trails HOA. Each one claimed I was in violation of community standards for things like non-compliant mailbox design and unauthorized landscaping modifications. I'd never seen these violations before. I peeled one off and saw a code printed on it. I typed it into the HOA's website. The fine listed under my resident profile, which I never created, was now over $3,000. As I stood there, I heard footsteps behind me. My next-door neighbor, Jeff, a mechanic who'd lived on the street longer than I had, was walking over with a tired look on his face. "Hey, Preston," he said. "Just wanted to give you a heads up. Cheryl told folks at last night's meeting that you were refusing to pay dues and that you were putting the neighborhood at risk for decline. They voted to increase enforcement on non-compliant properties." "I'm not even in the HOA," I said. "I know," Jeff replied, "but they've got a new strategy. They're saying that if your land touches the HOA's boundary, they can impose shared-use community standards." "I've never heard of that in my life." "Because it's made up," I said. "Completely fabricated." Jeff looked around, then leaned in closer. "You should know something else. Cheryl's husband isn't actually on the board, but he's the one who drafted those new maps. He runs a private mapping and surveying company out of their garage. They're using his maps to justify everything." That was the missing puzzle piece. They weren't just overstepping, they were falsifying documents to trap properties into their HOA web like a spider wrapping flies. I thanked Jeff and went inside. I already knew what I had to do next. The following day, I requested an official land survey from a licensed third-party firm. The surveyor came out with a team and drones, mapped every inch of my property, and cross-referenced it with county records. 2 days later, they handed me a full report that confirmed what I already knew. My land was never part of Sycamore Trails HOA and had never been amended to be so. I sent copies of the report to the county zoning board, the attorney general's office, and the sheriff's department. It didn't take long for things to escalate. At 7 a.m. on a Friday, I was woken by the sound of metal scraping pavement. I opened my blinds to find a tow truck in my driveway, preparing to hook up my truck. Standing beside it was Cheryl, arms crossed, barking orders into her phone. I stepped outside. Phone recording. "That's private property," I called out. "You don't have the right to tow anything here." Cheryl turned. "Your vehicle is in violation of HOA parking rules. It's been tagged for removal." "I'm not under your authority," I said calmly. "And I suggest you have that truck back off before you commit grand theft auto." The tow truck operator hesitated. I held up a folder. "I have certified documentation from the county, a licensed surveyor's report, and a pending investigation with the attorney general. If you touch that vehicle, you're complicit in a criminal act." The driver stepped away. Cheryl turned red. "This is harassment," I continued. "You've issued false claims, fabricated maps, and now you're attempting to steal property. That's criminal fraud and malicious interference." "I'm protecting property values," she snapped. "No," I said. "You're running a scam." She walked off without another word. 3 days later, I received a phone call from the county sheriff's office. Investigator Riley, a no-nonsense woman with a background in real estate fraud, had been assigned to the case. We set up a meeting the next day. At the station, I laid everything out: proof of exemption, the fraudulent map, the third-party survey, the HOA's escalating threats, and the attempt to tow my truck. Riley reviewed the documents with a sharp eye. "This isn't just overreach," she said. "This is systematic fraud. If they've been doing this to you, chances are they've done it to others." She asked for names. I gave her Jeff's, and he confirmed he'd been told his dues would double if he didn't support the new annexation plan. Riley raised an eyebrow at that. A week later, subpoenas were issued. Cheryl's husband's surveying business was shut down pending investigation. The HOA was placed under a court injunction prohibiting them from contacting me or attempting to enforce any actions. The best part? Cheryl didn't go quietly. At the next public zoning board meeting open to the entire community, Cheryl tried to defend herself. She claimed the new maps were interpretive boundaries and that the HOA had been acting in good faith. I stepped up with my folder and handed over the notarized statements, surveyor's report, and sheriff's findings to the board. "These are not interpretive," I said. "They're fabricated to extract money from non-members. That's fraud." The room was packed with neighbors. Jeff had spread the word, and dozens showed up, some clutching their own HOA notices. When the board saw the evidence and the growing crowd, they voted unanimously to launch a formal audit into Sycamore Trails HOA. That was the beginning of the unraveling. By the end of the month, Cheryl was named in a civil suit filed by multiple homeowners. Her husband faced charges for falsifying professional documents. Their assets were frozen while the investigation continued. HOA funds used to pay their legal fees were seized under court order. The final blow came when their attorney withdrew, citing non-payment and ethical conflicts. Cheryl tried representing herself. She lost. They filed for bankruptcy 2 months later. Word spread fast. The new acting HOA president, a retired accountant named Laura who'd been quietly horrified by Cheryl's actions, publicly apologized to every homeowner affected and dissolved the annexation committee permanently. She also implemented a new transparency rule. Every HOA decision now required a community vote and third-party review. As for me, I planted a new mailbox just because I could, with no stickers, no tags, and no false fines hanging from it. And every time I walk past that empty house with the "For Sale by Bank" sign out front, I don't feel a shred of guilt. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that when someone pushes too far, sometimes all it takes is a folder full of truth and a whole lot of persistence. It was just after dawn on a Thursday when a squad car rolled up in front of Cheryl's house. I watched from my porch as two investigators stepped out, one carrying a file box, the other a digital forensics bag. They didn't knock, they had a warrant. A few minutes later, Cheryl's husband was let out in a hoodie and slippers, hands cuffed behind his back. No one said a word. Across the street, Jeff emerged with his coffee and gave me a slow nod. Neither of us needed to speak. We'd both read the local news alert that morning. Charges filed for wire fraud, falsification of public documents, and unlawful use of GIS mapping software for financial gain. The story had grown legs. Local reporters started sniffing around after the zoning board audit revealed that at least 12 other properties had been falsely listed as part of the HOA. Some of those homeowners had paid up, under threat of liens, without realizing they'd been conned. Cheryl and her husband had pocketed over $70,000 in dues from those fraudulent claims. I took that day off work and drove down to the courthouse, where a public hearing was being held to determine whether a full criminal case would proceed. The courtroom was packed, not just with neighbors, but with reporters, attorneys, and a few people from nearby counties who'd apparently dealt with the same kind of HOA overreach. When Cheryl was brought in, hair pulled back, blazer too big on her shoulders, there was no trace of the woman who'd once barked orders at people like she ran the entire county. Her lawyer, a quiet man with thick glasses and a defeated posture, asked for a continuance. The judge denied it. Then the evidence started rolling in. The prosecuting attorney, a sharp woman named Hernandez, presented internal emails between Cheryl and her husband. One message outlined how they could boost community revenue by redrawing interpretive boundaries and collecting dues from fringe properties before anyone contests them. Another email congratulated Cheryl on getting Jeff next door to comply without paperwork. When Hernandez read that one aloud, Jeff stood up in the gallery. The judge gestured for him to sit, but not before a few people clapped. I was called to the witness stand just before lunch. Hernandez handed me a copy of the forged boundary map. "Did you authorize this map to be used to determine your property status?" "No," I said, "and it doesn't match the county record or my deed." "What did you do when you received this map and were told you owed back dues?" "I gathered documentation, filed a dispute, and contacted the zoning board and attorney general. I also installed surveillance cameras because I didn't trust what they'd try next." There was a pause. "What made you suspicious enough to install surveillance?" "They attempted to tow my vehicle from my own driveway without authority." That's when I knew this wasn't a mistake, it was targeted harassment. After my testimony, the judge reviewed the certified survey and zoning board's official response. Then she looked at Cheryl's attorney. "You understand this wasn't a civil oversight," she said. "This was orchestrated fraud." Cheryl's lawyer didn't argue. He just asked for bail to be set low. The judge denied bail altogether, citing the risk of document tampering and witness intimidation. Cheryl was led out of court without speaking. Back in the hallway, a few neighbors approached me. One was a single mom named Dana who'd paid nearly $800 in late fees last spring because she didn't know she wasn't in the HOA. Another was an elderly couple who'd been threatened with foreclosure if they didn't replace their fence. "I thought I was just behind on dues," Dana said, her voice shaking. "I didn't know they had no right to charge me." I gave her the contact info for the state restitution office. Hernandez had already set up a victims resource team to help everyone who'd been scammed. A month later, Cheryl's assets were officially seized. Her bank accounts were frozen, her home was foreclosed, and the IRS had launched a parallel investigation into unreported income. The community watched it unfold like a real-life drama no one had asked for, but everyone now followed. That might have been the end of it, but there was one detail I couldn't let go. During one of the hearings, a document had surfaced listing administrative bonuses Cheryl had paid to herself and two other HOA board members. One name caught my eye, Brenda Kessler. Brenda was the compliance officer who used to walk through the neighborhood snapping photos of people's garbage bins and porch lights. I hadn't seen her since the audit. I started digging. Turns out, Brenda had been collecting a commission for every fine issued under the fraudulent annexation plan, and she'd quietly resigned the week Cheryl was indicted. I asked Jeff if he'd seen her recently. No, he said, but her house is still occupied. Lights go on at night. I checked the county employment database. Brenda had taken a new job as a permitting clerk at the city's property development office. That posed a new risk. If she was working inside the city planning department, she could potentially manipulate permit approvals, inspection records, or zoning variances. I compiled everything I found: emails, payment records, resignation letter, and sent it to investigator Riley at the sheriff's office. 2 weeks later, Brenda was suspended pending investigation. The ripple effects didn't stop there. The city council, embarrassed by the scandal and the holes it revealed in their oversight system, launched a full review of all HOA practices within the county. Public meetings were held. A new ordinance was passed requiring every HOA to submit annual boundary confirmations, reviewed by third-party auditors and made publicly accessible online. Meanwhile, the Sycamore Trails HOA, now gutted and under caretaker management, had its charter suspended. A vote was held to dissolve the organization completely. Over 80% of residents supported it. Those who had been coerced into paying false fines were issued checks from the restitution fund set up by the court. Cheryl's seized assets funded most of it. I never once celebrated in public. I didn't need to, but I did host a neighborhood barbecue. Jeff brought ribs. Dana made peach cobbler. Even the elderly couple who'd nearly lost their home came by with a bottle of sweet tea and stories from the old days, before HOAs tried to run the place like a private kingdom. Someone brought a Bluetooth speaker and started playing music. Kids ran through the sprinklers. For the first time in years, there was no one patrolling with a clipboard. No one taking pictures of porch furniture. No color-coded violation tags fluttering in the wind. Just neighbors. Real ones. One woman, Teresa, a nurse I'd never spoken to before, came up to me with a paper plate and a quiet smile. I was scared to speak up when they came after me, she said. But watching you stand your ground, it gave the rest of us the nerve to push back. I nodded. No one should have to fight alone. She looked past me, toward Cheryl's shuttered house with the overgrown yard and auction signs staked into the lawn. Funny, she said. That place used to be the example of order. Now it's the one eyesore in the whole neighborhood. I didn't say anything. I just took a sip of lemonade and let the breeze do the talking. That night, I walked the street before heading in. The porch lights were still on. The flags still hung. But the fear was gone. No one was tiptoeing around fake rules or ducking fines. The HOA had once been a shadow creeping behind every fence. Now, it was just another bad memory. One we'd all outgrown. Together. By early spring, the neighborhood had returned to something resembling normal. Gardens were blooming again without the surprise appearance of violation tags. People left their trash cans out an extra day without fear of being fined. A few kids even chalked hopscotch lines on the sidewalk, something that would have earned a formal warning not long ago. I was on my front porch, oiling the hinges on my gate, when my phone buzzed. It was Investigator Riley. Preston, she said. You're going to want to come down to the courthouse. The assistant district attorney is filing new charges against Cheryl Whitmore. This ties back to something much bigger. When I arrived, Riley was waiting outside with a file tucked under her arm. She didn't waste time. 2 weeks ago, we got a tip from a former board member. Apparently, Cheryl was funneling HOA funds into a private development shell company. The name on the paperwork? KC Development Group. I raised an eyebrow. KC as in her initials? Exactly. She and her husband used it to purchase 3 vacant parcels just south of the neighborhood land that hadn't been cleared for residential zoning. Then they created fake community improvement proposals and backdated board approvals so they could push expenses through the HOA's operating budget. Was any of that even legal? Not even close. It's embezzlement. And the kicker? The permits they submitted to the city planning office were signed off by none other than Brenda Kessler before she left her job there under investigation. I followed Riley inside. The assistant district attorney, a stern guy named Malik Chin, laid out the case in a conference room. They had traced a series of payments thousands at a time tied to maintenance projects that never happened. Lawn service invoices billed to non-existent addresses. Power washing contracts for homes that didn't exist. All the funds had ended up in KC Development's account. They were siphoning money under the radar, Chen said. And they were bold. They even created a fake vendor named Evergreen Neighborhood Solutions to justify the charges. Was anyone else involved? I asked. We're looking at 2 former board treasurers, Chen said. One of them flipped. Said Cheryl promised they'd all see a return once the land was rezoned and sold to a commercial buyer. It all made sense now. The sudden push to annex nearby properties. The fake maps. The manufactured fines and fees. Cheryl hadn't just been trying to control the neighborhood. She'd been financing a land grab, using HOA money and threats to mask the theft. Later that week, subpoenas were issued for KC Development's bank records. The paper trail was airtight. Cheryl had funneled over $200,000 into the company over a span of 5 years. Most of it came from inflated dues and unauthorized assessments. The court froze every account associated with her or her husband. Their remaining rental property was seized. A second indictment was filed, this time for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, and grand larceny. At the next hearing, the courtroom was even more crowded than the last. New victims had come forward, residents who had paid thousands in special project fees over the years without ever seeing a single improvement. The judge ordered Cheryl held without bail. Her new court-appointed attorney tried to argue diminished capacity due to stress. The judge didn't buy it. By midsummer, the county had filed a civil forfeiture case to reclaim assets purchased with misappropriated HOA funds. Cheryl's personal vehicle, a luxury SUV she had once used to patrol the neighborhood, was seized from a storage facility 2 towns over. The sentencing came 3 weeks later. The courtroom was packed. I sat near the back, next to Jeff and Dana. People had dressed up. Not for celebration, this wasn't a victory lap, but because it felt important. Like the final chapter of something that had haunted us all for too long. The judge read the sentence aloud. Ms. Whitmore, for the crimes of wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud, and misappropriation of community funds, this court sentences you to 5 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 36 months. Additionally, you are ordered to pay restitution totaling $172,000 to the victims identified by the district attorney's office. The courtroom was silent until the gavel came down. Then someone in the front row softly exhaled. It was the elderly man who'd nearly lost his house over a fake fence violation. He didn't speak, just nodded once and sat up a little straighter. Outside, reporters gathered for statements. I didn't speak to them. Neither did Jeff. But Dana did. She lied to all of us, she told the cameras. She used fear and fake rules to steal from people who just wanted to live in peace. We're not afraid of her anymore. The footage went viral locally. Within days, other neighborhoods started posting their own stories, HOAs trying to overreach, to annex land, to bully residents into silence. Cheryl's downfall became a catalyst for something bigger. The city council passed a new ordinance mandating transparency in all HOA financial activity. Any HOA operating within city limits now had to submit quarterly reports, subject to random audits by a civilian oversight board. The oversight board had 5 elected positions. Jeff nominated me for one. I ran unopposed. At the first meeting, I sat at the end of a long table, reviewing a stack of reports from HOAs across the city. Most were clean. A few had questionable line items. I flagged them for follow-up. After the meeting, a young woman approached me in the parking lot. She looked nervous, clutching a manila envelope. I heard what you did, she said. I think my HOA is doing something similar. They just raised our annual dues by 40% and won't show us the budget report. I took the envelope. Let's take a look. That was how it started. Not just one neighborhood pushing back, but many. People talking to each other, sharing documents, asking questions. The fear that once kept everyone quiet had cracked and shattered. By the end of the year, Sycamore Trails no longer existed as a legal entity. The land Cheryl had tried to flip was returned to the city under forfeiture. It was turned into a public green space where kids could play and neighbors could walk their dogs without being photographed for violations. Someone planted a tree in the center of it, a big oak with a plaque at its base that read simply, "This land belongs to the people who live on it." On the first day of fall, I found myself walking through that park. The breeze had that crisp edge that hinted at colder days ahead. I passed Jeff, who was helping install a bench near the playground. Further down, Dana was chatting with a mom from another neighborhood about starting a community watch. As I reached the far edge of the park, I spotted the surveyor who had helped me months ago. He was standing next to a new signpost, hammering it into the ground. I walked over. "What's that?" I asked. "Updated boundary marker," he said. "City wants to make sure everything's crystal clear. No more creative map making." He stepped back to admire his work. The sign read, "Non-HOA zone. Protected by City Oversight Ordinance 1482. I looked down the quiet street, past the homes and the open porches, past the kids riding bikes and the dogs chasing leaves. It didn't look like much from the outside, but it was ours now, undivided, unthreatened, and finally, truly free. And if anyone ever tried to pull what Cheryl did again, they'd find a neighborhood that knew its rights, knew the law, and wasn't afraid to fight back with truth, paper trails, and a whole lot of backbone.